The year was 1962. Boston, a city steeped in history and tradition, was about to face one of its darkest chapters. The air was thick with an unspoken dread, and the streets, usually bustling with life, seemed eerily quiet. It was as if the city itself knew that something sinister was lurking in the shadows. A dark cloud hung over Boston. The once vibrant neighborhoods were now cloaked in an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. People whispered in hushed tones, sharing rumors and speculations about the mysterious figure that had begun to haunt their city. The city, known for its history and charm, was gripped by fear. Iconic landmarks that once stood as symbols of pride now cast long, ominous shadows. The sense of community that had always defined Boston was slowly eroding, replaced by suspicion and paranoia. A killer stalked the streets. He was ruthless. He was cunning. He was invisible. The Boston Strangler, as he came to be known, moved through the city like a ghost, leaving a trail of fear and death in his wake. His victims were chosen seemingly at random, making it impossible to predict where he would strike next. No one knew who he was, but everyone knew his name: the Boston Strangler. Women lived in terror. They double-checked their locks, peered out their windows, and avoided being alone. The sense of safety that once enveloped their homes was shattered, replaced by a constant, gnawing fear. They avoided going out alone at night. The police were baffled. Despite their best efforts, the Strangler remained elusive. Meetings were held, strategies were devised, but the killer always seemed to be one step ahead. The frustration and desperation among the law enforcement were palpable. Every day seemed to bring a new victim, each more terrifying than the last. The newspapers were filled with gruesome headlines, and the details of the murders sent chills down the spines of Bostonians. The city was caught in a nightmare from which it seemed there was no escape. The city held its breath. The once lively streets were now deserted at night, and an eerie stillness settled over Boston. It was as if the entire city was waiting, hoping for a miracle that would end the terror. They waited for the killer to be caught. The tension was unbearable, and every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. The people of Boston clung to the hope that justice would prevail and that the nightmare would finally come to an end. His name was Albert DeSalvo. He was a seemingly ordinary man. He was a husband. He was a father. He blended into the background, but behind his unremarkable facade lurked a monster. DeSalvo would eventually confess to being the Boston Strangler, responsible for the brutal murders of 13 women. His victims, all female, ranged in age from 19 to 85. They were scattered across Boston and its surrounding suburbs. They came from all walks of life. The seemingly random nature of his crimes only amplified the terror that gripped the city. The victims of the Boston Strangler were not chosen at random. They were targeted, they were stalked, they were hunted. DeSalvo selected his victims carefully, often posing as a workman or a delivery man to gain access to their homes. He preyed on women who lived alone or who were home alone during the day. He used their vulnerability against them. His crimes revealed a dark underbelly of society, highlighting the vulnerability of women living alone in an era when they were often overlooked and underserved. Anna Sleeses was 55 years old. She had lived a life filled with both joy and hardship, but she always carried herself with grace and dignity. Her warm smile and kind eyes were a testament to her gentle nature. She lived alone in a small apartment in Boston. The apartment was modest, but it was her sanctuary, filled with memories and personal treasures that she had collected over the years. Despite its size, it was a place of comfort and peace for Anna. She was a devout woman. Her faith was a cornerstone of her life, providing her with strength and solace. Every morning she would spend time in prayer, her rosary beads gently slipping through her fingers as she whispered her devotions. She was a loving sister. Anna cherished her family, especially her sister, with whom she shared a deep bond. They would often reminisce about their childhood, laughing and crying together over old photographs and memories. She was looking forward to the visit of a dear friend. Anna had spent the day preparing, setting the table with her best dishes and looking out the window with anticipation. She loved hosting and the joy of sharing her home with loved ones. She had no idea that she was about to become the Boston Strangler's first known victim. The shadows that lurked outside her apartment that night were a prelude to the horror that was about to unfold. On June 14, 1962, Anna's friend went to her apartment. It was a day like any other, but it would soon become a date etched in infamy. The clock ticked away the seconds, unaware of the tragedy that had already occurred. She found the door unlocked. She stepped inside. The air was still, and an eerie silence filled the room. Her heart began to race as she called out for Anna, hoping for a response that never came. She called out Anna's name. There was no answer. The silence was deafening, and a sense of dread began to creep over her. She moved through the apartment, her worry growing with each step. She found Anna's body in the bathroom. The sight was horrifying, a scene of unimaginable violence that would haunt her forever. Anna's lifeless form lay there, a stark contrast to the vibrant woman she had known. She had been strangled with her own nylon stockings. The brutality of the act was shocking, a cruel end to a life that had been filled with kindness and love. Anna Slaze's tragic death marked the beginning of a terrifying chapter in Boston's history. Section 5. The Mark of the Strangler. The Boston Strangler had a terrifying signature. He strangled his victims. He often posed them after death, arranging their bodies in grotesque and degrading positions. He used whatever was at hand as a ligature. Sometimes it was a scarf. Sometimes it was a pair of stockings. Sometimes it was his own bare hands. The brutality of the crime shocked even the most seasoned detectives. Section 6. The Shadow Knows. DeSalvo's crimes continued for 2 long years. He terrorized the city of Boston. He left a trail of fear and heartbreak in his wake. He seemed to melt away after each murder. He was a phantom. He was a nightmare come to life. He exploited the societal norms of the time. He used the anonymity of a big city to his advantage. He thrived on the fear he instilled in his victims. He was a predator in the truest sense of the word. Section 7. Cornered. The police were relentless in their pursuit of the Boston Strangler. They followed every lead. They interviewed countless suspects. They worked tirelessly to bring the killer to justice. Finally, in 1964, they caught a break. A young woman escaped the clutches of an attacker. She provided a detailed description. The description led the police to Albert DeSalvo. DeSalvo was arrested on unrelated charges. While in custody, he confessed to being the Boston Strangler. Section 8. The Confession. DeSalvo's confession sent shockwaves through the nation. People were horrified. They were fascinated. They couldn't believe that this seemingly ordinary man could be responsible for such heinous crimes. His confession was detailed. It was chilling. He described each of his victims. He recounted their final moments. He expressed no remorse. His words sent chills down the spines of everyone who heard them. Section 9. Echoes of Terror. Albert DeSalvo was never tried for the Boston Strangler murders. Despite his confessions, the legal system never brought him to trial for these heinous acts. Instead, he was convicted for a series of sexual assaults that terrorized the city. The public was left with a sense of unfinished justice, a lingering question of whether the true perpetrator had been caught. He was sentenced to life in prison for a series of rapes. The courtroom was filled with a mix of relief and frustration. Relief that a dangerous man was off the streets, but frustration that the full extent of his crimes might never be legally acknowledged. The heavy iron doors of the prison closed behind him, but the shadows of his actions continued to loom large over Boston. He was stabbed to death in prison in 1973. The news of his death spread quickly, igniting a mix of reactions. Some felt a grim sense of justice, while others were disturbed by the violent end to his life. The prison walls that had contained him could not protect him from the retribution that found him within. His death did little to quell the fear he had instilled in the hearts of so many. The terror he spread was not easily forgotten. Women continued to look over their shoulders, haunted by the memory of his crimes. The playgrounds and streets that once felt safe were now shrouded in an air of unease. The Boston Strangler case had a profound impact on society. It was a wake-up call that reverberated through the community, changing the way people lived their daily lives. The bustling streets of Boston were now filled with a heightened sense of vigilance. People began to lock their doors religiously, a simple act that had become a symbol of their newfound caution. It changed the way people thought about personal safety. The sense of security that once came naturally was now something that had to be actively maintained. Home security systems became more common, and the sight of someone checking their locks became a nightly ritual. The fear of the unknown had taken root, altering the fabric of everyday life. It highlighted the vulnerability of women. The case brought to light the specific dangers that women faced, sparking conversations about gender and safety. Women were more cautious, more aware of their surroundings, and more vocal about their fears. The Boston Strangler had not just attacked individuals, he had attacked the sense of security that women had in their own communities. It led to advancements in forensic science and criminal profiling. The need to catch such a cunning criminal pushed the boundaries of investigative techniques. Forensic science saw significant advancements, and criminal profiling became a more refined tool in the arsenal of law enforcement. The case became a catalyst for change, driving improvements that would benefit future investigations. But most of all, it served as a chilling reminder that monsters can hide in plain sight. The Boston Strangler was not a faceless entity. He was a man who walked among the public, blending into the crowd. This realization was perhaps the most terrifying of all, that evil could be lurking just around the corner, hidden behind a seemingly ordinary facade. The echoes of DeSalvo's crimes still resonate today, a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. His story is a stark illustration of how one man's actions can ripple through time, leaving an indelible mark on the collective consciousness. The fear he instilled continues to be a cautionary tale, a reminder to remain vigilant in a world where danger can often be hidden in plain sight.